Are you a PTO or PTA looking to update your bylaws or standing rules, but wondering like what the actual heck? Because it seems like so much. If we haven't yet met, I'm Christina Heideck. I'm a PTO, PTA. If we haven't yet met, I'm Christina Heideck. I'm a PTO and family engagement expert, and I love to get nerdy about bylaws and standing rules. As a recovering attorney, I just can't seem to get enough of this. Now you might think I'm a little over the top about bylaws and standing rules. I'm a little passionate about it just because I believe a really good set can solve so many problems for school parent groups. You know, if they're not addressing these issues, then they're just going to pop up elsewhere and there won't be any guidance and it'll just feel like a whole bunch of drama. So let's talk about what you need to do when you are updating them. I'm not going to talk about the specific process that is totally covered. I have a whole kit, the Bylaws and Standing Rules Made Simple. It walks through the entire process of updating an existing set or creating a set from scratch. First, you should be looking at your bylaws and standing rules either every year or every other year. Kind of depends on if there have been major changes in your group. That's kind of when it's going to be a signal to you that it is time to take a look at your governing documents. So don't create these guys and then set them on a shelf and just ignore them. That is the exact opposite of the purpose of bylaws and standing rules. They're supposed to be like a mini little kind of like user guide for your group in guiding all of the decisions that you're making and outlining some of the procedures that you should be following on the regular, right? The second thing is that when you are updating these, fancy language does not make them more official. No, super complicated language. No, that is so like your grandmother's PTO. Like maybe that was appropriate in the 1900s when PTOs were first starting to be a thing. It is not appropriate in our year 2025. You want to be using real normal language, just how you would speak. If you were updating a set of bylaws and you're finding that you're having difficulty understanding what it means, that's your signal to kind of simplify. Having it be very complicated and using multisyllabic words and complicated sentence structures does not make it more official. What it is doing is actually hurting your group because it's making it so that it's not usable. Not everybody went to college. Not everybody went to law school like me. Like I can handle a really complex set of bylaws because I have training in looking at the words and all of the stuff that it kind of takes to understand complex language like that. But not everybody is like that. So you really want them to be able to be understood by your fifth grader. Really, that is a good basic. Maybe they won't actually be able to understand everything because it does take some context and some knowledge. But generally, you want to make them as simple as possible. It'll make it easier to understand, which will make it easier to implement and follow by current and future group members. And that's exactly what you want. Third thing, and I kind of talked about how there was a process, about how in the Bylaws and Standing Rules Made Simple kit that there's a process laid out for you to follow. That's the right one to follow. You want to be following the right process. You don't want to just make it up. So there are definitely some ways that you can ensure adhering. Well, here I am using fancy words when I just told you not to use the fancy words. I cannot help it sometimes. Let me rephrase that. When you are following the process and updating the bylaws in particular, because of the nature of bylaws and their overall importance and kind of heft of meaning to your organization, that they're foundational. It just talks about like the whole aim of your group, the mission, the purpose, big picture items like that. They're super important and you don't want to just willy-nilly change them. Like you have to be presenting the proposed changes 1 month and then giving everybody enough time to think about and talk about it and not voting on it for at least 1 month so that there could be full consideration of the changes and that people really have time to think about it and talk, and that you can think about, maybe there will be some unintended consequences with the change. The last thing is that once you have the changes, you've gone through the process, everything's been approved by the group, you need to implement those changes right away. There's no, a lot of times with real legislation that's coming out of Congress or maybe your state house legislature, sometimes they'll say that they'll agree on a law, but then it won't be effective for 6 months or usually there's a specified date when it will go into effect. You don't have that with PTOs. The second the group decides on a change, that change is now the new rule that everyone needs to follow. So that new copies of the bylaws and standing rules should be distributed after every change so everybody can stay up to date. I hope this has been super, super helpful to getting you into a more comfortable place with your group's bylaws and standing rules, and that when you are going through the process of updating them, you're keeping things in mind, that you're reviewing them consistently on an annual or biannual basis, that you're using real, plain and simple language, no fanciness is needed, that you're following the right process, and lastly, that they're implementing the changes straight away. So hope you enjoyed this and that you will join me for my next video.